Chapter 8. Carter took Faith's arm, aware of the heat her body emanated as she pressed against him, and led her through the Owens' home. It was a mansion of glass, with an open floor plan and a lap pool stretching through the center of the home. Bridges spanned the pool, connecting the kitchen and living room to the bedrooms and office. It was the most amazing home he'd ever seen. In this environment, surrounded by 50 or so high-ranking members of the Enforcement Bureau, Carter expected Faith to stumble or freeze up. Surprisingly, she didn't do either. She introduced herself to the captain and members of the council as Carter's fiancée, smiling and talking effortlessly. It actually felt comfortable to have her arms snake through his. Although they could have remained indoors, where a few members were gathering around the hearth, the party was centralized in the backyard. A large tri-level patio lit with tiny white lights ended at a small section of beach, looking out a private dock stretched into Lake Washington. "You're doing great," he said, escorting her onto the patio. "I'm so nervous I'm sweating." Pressing his hand against the small of her back, he leaned in close and whispered, "I can't tell." She smelled sweet, soft, like she'd just gotten out of the shower. He thought making the switch from friend to girlfriend was going to be uncomfortable, but he was wrong. Touching her back was easy. He didn't hesitate or question whether it looked right, and he breathed in the rose-scented fragrance in her hair like a lover would do to his partner, without even realizing it. "I could use a drink." She brushed her hands up and down her arms. Or two. Hadn't she just said she was sweating? If he wasn't mistaken, goosebumps were blooming over her skin. He escorted her to a bar situated in front of a line of trees. The home wasn't adjacent to a forest, but there were enough trees to provide shadow and cover. From the homes next door. "Vodka cranberry for the lady," he ordered. "I'll take a Crown and Coke." The bartender mixed quickly and slid them over. "Carter Griffin, there you are," a male voice said from behind him. He turned. Nate looked presentable as he always did. Black suit and skinny tie, hair buzzed short. They shook hands as Nate gave Carter a wide, pompous grin. "Good to see you," Carter said. "This is my fiancée, Faith Hamilton." "So you're the worthy competition," she said, extending her hand. "Pleasure to meet you." "Pleasure's mine." Instead of shaking, Nate turned her hand over and kissed her knuckles. Carter had the uncanny urge to growl in disapproval. He dismissed the reaction as ridiculous and shoved his hands in his pockets to stop from hauling Faith against him. "Carter," Nate said, "I think you've met my fiancé." "I have." "Pumpkin," Nate called to a woman in red silk standing a few feet away, her back to them. A waterfall of blonde hair cascaded down her back, and where her hair ended, the fabric of the dress was cut away, revealing a wolf paw print tattoo. When she turned, Carter froze. Nate draped his arm over her shoulder. "Paisley Brooks." Yeah, Carter had more than met the model-turned-actress. They went out a few months back and had a few bouts between the sheets before he'd called it quits. She pursed her bright red lips before pulling them back into a smile. "Good to see you, Carter. I haven't seen you since that night at Cosmos. I was at the bar for a few minutes, turned around, and you just disappeared on me. Didn't know what happened." He wasn't about to sit around and watch her flirt with every other man in the bar. "That's what happened. I realized I had a better deal waiting for me somewhere else." Giving in to the urge surging through his veins, he tugged Faith against him. "This is my fiancée, Faith." "Oh." Paisley set her martini on the bar and extended her hand. "Lovely to meet you." "Same here." Faith smiled, though Carter could feel tension ratcheting through her shoulders. "How do you and Carter know each other?" "We used to date," Paisley practically purred. And then she beamed. "Didn't he tell you?" "Yeah, he had." Faith took a hard drink. No need to dig up old things from the past. Carter buried his face in his glass to hide the grin stretching across his face. Faith had her claws out. Paisley smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes, and Nate ordered a scotch on the rocks. "Aren't you a darling?" Paisley said tightly. "Where has Carter been hiding?" "You." "In his bed." Faith pushed her drink across the bar. "Carter, what do you say? We thank the Owenses for welcoming us into their home tonight. Lead the way." They traipsed around a sparkling pool and across a wooden dance floor to where the Owenses were seated and talking to the captain. Carter couldn't help but notice that Faith walked with an elegant kind of grace. Was it the shoes? The dress? The expectations of the night? He'd never seen her look more regal than this moment. She was putting on one hell of a show. This fake engagement of theirs just might work. As they stepped off the raised dance floor, her ankle twisted. She pitched forward, gasping as she fell. He reached out to catch her, but it was too late. Everyone on the patio let out a collective moan as her knees hit the concrete. Are you all right? Cradling her beneath his arm, he helped her up. Faith, are you okay? I'm fine, she bit out, but she wouldn't stand up straight. She flattened out the front of her dress, restrapped her heel using his arm for balance. I tore my dress. Look, don't worry about the dress. Come on, let's sit you down. When she nodded, Carter finally got a look at her face. Tears hung to her lashes and threatened to fall. The sight pinched his stomach. Dear, how are your knees? Mrs. Owens asked, coming to help. I've told Manny to put an easement against the edges of that dance floor, but getting a man to do anything is a pain in the behind. Are you hurt badly? Faith hobbled to a chair at their table. I think I just need to get off my feet for a moment. Do you want ice? Carter asked. Ice? Yes. Mrs. Owens hollered. Manny, get some ice. No, really. Don't trouble yourselves. Faith sat down and tried to hide the rip that sliced from her knee to the floor. Just give me a minute. Sweetheart, Carter said with so much ease that it shocked him. Take all the time you need. He called her sweetheart. Don't get used to this feeling. Faith had repeated those words to herself over and over again throughout the party, but they didn't seem to be working. The more time she and Carter spent together this way, the more difficult it was for Faith to separate the act from reality. Carter looked at her as if she was his fiancée, as if he truly cared for her. His touch was soft, the gleam in his light eyes gentle. Don't get used to this. They'd spent the next hour at a private table with the captain and the Owenses. When dinner was served, Mrs. Owens insisted that Faith and Carter stay and join them at their table. They talked over herb-crusted salmon and asparagus and laughed heartily after a few glasses of wine. After getting over the initial embarrassment, Faith realized tripping over the dance floor lip was probably the best thing that could have happened to them. They got to sit at the table with influential people while Nate and Carter's ex, the freaking actress, had to sit near the pool. She didn't want to be too hopeful, but it seemed like she and Carter were hitting it off. Carter leaned close. How's your ankle? Getting better. Good. He smiled, warming her heart. Want to take a walk? They just lit up the gazebo. Faith followed his line of sight to the pier jutting into the lake. The end, a gazebo had been illuminated with strings of miniature white lights. The night was completely dark, and not a single star peeked from the lumbering cloud cover. It smelled like rain. All right. Carter pulled out her chair and waited for her to lead the way. As David Gray played softly in the background, they wound around the pool, passing Nate and Bimbo, who pretended not to notice them, and down to the beach. They ascended the few steps onto the dock, and then walked side by side to the end where a bench stood. The water was pitch black, and the warm lights of the houses along the shore looked like they were calling people home. I can't thank you enough, he said as they sat on the bench seat beneath the lights. You've got them eating out of your hand. I don't know about that. You do. His gaze heated the side of her face. Did you trip on purpose? She laughed and covered the tear in her dress with her hand. No, but it worked out pretty well, didn't it? You certainly got the sympathy vote. For the next few minutes, nothing but the sound of water lapping against the wood posts of the pier filled the silence between them. Faith couldn't even hear her own heartbeat. She was completely at ease with him. Their eyes met, and for a split second Faith thought he was going to lean in and kiss her. Want another drink? He asked quickly, averting his gaze to the lake. I'd like another drink. He stood, brushing his hands down his pants. Wine? She nodded. I guess. Sure. Wait here, he said, then stormed down the pier. It was quiet without him still. The solitude under the gazebo was nice at first, but as the minutes dragged on, Faith started to wonder if he was going to return at all. She peered through the dark at the Owens' house. Carter wasn't at the bar, but she couldn't pick him out from the other members of the pack who were also in tuxedos. Suddenly, a silhouette appeared at the end of the pier. He was coming back. Nerves spiraled in her belly. She breathed deeply and slid her hands beneath her legs so they wouldn't quiver. He was finally seeing her as someone he could be with. She'd finally gotten out of the dreaded friend zone. She was going to owe Tracy big time for helping her pick out this dress. He's a dumbass for leaving you out here all alone, a deep voice said. Nate. Deflating, she said. He just went to get us a drink. Didn't feel right being out here with Nate like this. He'll be right back. Mind if I sit? He pointed to the bench. Yes. No, not at all. Faith scooted to the end of the bench, making room for Carter's competition. How long have you two been a couple? His tone was oddly light, like they were long-lost friends who were in need of catching up. About a year off and on. Don't stumble. Play the part. He's dated other women this year, he said, as rain dimpled the water around them and made a soft pitter-pat on the gazebo roof above. Doesn't that bother you? She looked at him, feigning confidence. We haven't been exclusive until recently. He's dated other women, and I've dated other men. His relationships with them would only bother me if I was insecure about what we have. And you're not, Nate said. No. It was raining harder now. The clouds must have really opened up. Faith glanced down the pier. Empty. Carter still wasn't coming. What would have held him up for this long? Well, I've got a confession to make, he said softly. The relationship he had with my fiancé bothers me. You're a stronger person than I am to let that kind of bond roll off your shoulders. Faith twitched but didn't take the bait. From what Paisley says, they were close to getting married. That's nice. Didn't sound familiar though. Faith mentally scrolled through Carter's dating reel. He dated Paisley a few times, but he'd said they weren't serious. A fling, he'd said. Why wouldn't he have told her the truth? When are you two getting married? Lightning ripped open the sky, illuminating the hard lines of Nate's face. Next weekend. His jaw clenched. But we're going to need to have a talk. Before then. Especially after tonight. What do you mean? Thunder rumbled the gazebo, and a gust of wind blew through the posts, chilling Faith to the bone. Because I don't like the way they're talking. Nate paced around the bench and rested his hands on Faith's shoulders. He pointed to the top of the patio near the back doors of the house. They're standing too close, like two people who still share something. Through the rain, Faith spotted two figures. One was facing the lake and the other was pressed against his or her side. As lightning illuminated the dark, the sharp angles of Carter's face and the bright red sheen of Paisley's dress came into view. They weren't doing anything wrong. They weren't kissing. She couldn't even tell if they were touching or if they were simply standing really close together. But Nate was right. Carter should have been out here with her instead of pinned against the wall by a Hollywood starlet. Although he and Faith weren't actually dating, which meant he could stand near or touch anyone he wanted. He'd sworn not make her look foolish for the next few months. They were at a business function. He was supposed to be with her, his new fiancée. And he was flirting with an ex-girlfriend. Now she felt foolish. Slowly Faith glanced down at her tattered dress, the crazy tall heels. Strapped to her feet, the French pedicure. She raised her chin and sighed. She'd made a fool of herself by thinking she could pretend to be somebody she wasn't. For thinking Carter might actually feel something for her beyond friendship. For wanting him to. As the clouds on the horizon parted, the bright yellow glare of the moon peeked through, wrenching her heart. I'm sorry, she said, taking off her heels and hooking the straps with her fingers. I have to go. She left Nate in the gazebo and ran down the pier, eager to shift. Desperate to tear through these clothes and be herself again. As she hit the line of trees behind the bar, she let the energy balling in her middle explode outward. Muscles stretched and elongated. She dropped to all fours as a coat of silky brown hair covered her body. The dress fell away to tatters and the heels dropped by the wayside. Striding through the trees and rain, Faith felt more like herself than she did at the party, in clothes that barely fit her and the heels she had to borrow from a friend. As she took off alongside the house and headed toward the street, a few howls erupted from behind her. While in wolf form she could sense the others, and now she was sensing that the wolf pack was confused and concerned, probably worried that she'd let someone on the street spot her. A moment later she could tell they were sending out a few wolves to track her and bring her back. She wasn't stupid enough to get caught. Paws striking fast, Faith wound around trees and made it to the front gate. Even though she knew she shouldn't, she looked back at the Owens' mansion. The front door opened. Carter stood in the entryway, hands hanging at his sides, a look of bewilderment marring his gorgeous face. Chapter 9. Faith. In the dark, Carter banged on her front door, his fists aching from clenching them so hard. The drive home from the party hadn't cooled him off, like he thought it would. 2 hours later, even after the moon had arced across the night sky, his blood was still boiling. Faith had left him high and dry. "I know you're in there. I can smell something baking." No answer. He'd stupidly waited for Faith to return to the party. He'd told the members of the bureau that she didn't feel well, so she must not have been able to suppress the urge to shift. It happened to the best werewolves from time to time. But she hadn't returned. How she got back to her place without being seen, he had no idea. He paced along the porch, peeking in the living room windows. She had the blinds shut and the curtains drawn. Humperdinck yelped from inside and scratched at the front door. "Faith." He knocked on the window. "I'm not going to leave until you come out here and talk to me." Radio silence. Somewhere inside, a door slammed shut, followed by extensive cursing. Suddenly, the stench of something burning stung his nose. What the devil was going on? Was she in trouble? Worry niggled at his gut, replacing the irritation that had been simmering there. Desperation seeping in, Carter slid his hand along the top of her doorframe and brushed against her hide a key. He took the key, shoved it into the lock, and pushed open the door. "Faith." "Damn it," she hollered. Smoke billowed out of the kitchen. The fire alarm went off, blaring at an inconceivable ear-piercing level. "Get the broom. Fan the alarm. Are you trying to burn down the damn house?" She waved potholders frantically over a burned pan spewing smoke. "The broom." He did as he was told, running to the closet and yanking out a broom. By the time he got back to the kitchen, she was hauling ass out the front door and into the rain, the smoking pan outstretched in her shaking hands. Humperdinck yelped and chased Carter down, a wild and horny look in his eye. Smoke clung to the ceiling and somehow seemed to hover near the ringing alarm. He swished the broom in front of it, driving away the smoke. When the alarm was finally silenced, Faith re-entered the living room, minus the burned dessert, huffing and puffing. She was soaked from a few seconds of being in the rain, her WSU sweater clinging to her chest. "What were you trying to do?" he asked, continuing to swing the broom over his head. The tuxedo coat was tight over his arms, making the motion difficult. "Torch the place." "I was baking." She brushed by him as she stormed into the kitchen and turned off the stove. "I was pissed off as hell and wanting to blow off some steam. I've heard baking relaxes people." "What people?" "You know people." "I've never heard that," he said, watching the last traces of smoke dissipate. "What were you baking?" "Fiery chocolate lava cake." He laughed and set the broom against the wall. "At least you got the fiery part right." She chucked a potholder at him. It hit him square in the chest and then fell to the floor, nearly missing Humperdinck. "Wait, how'd you get in here?" she asked, hands on her hips. "I used your secret key." "I've seriously got to move that." She blew wet strands of hair out of her face. "Now that you've got a fire show, why don't you show yourself the door?" "Don't be like that." He strode into the kitchen. She backed against the stove. "How'd you get back here without being seen?" She planted her hands on her hips. "I ran for about a mile and then called Seattle Canine Cab Company. They had a car in the area, so I didn't have to wait long." Seattle Canine Cab Company was a free taxi company paid for by the Wolf Pack to assist wolves who shifted at inopportune moments. They carried clothes in the trunk, most sizes stuffed in huge pieces of luggage, and dropped shifters anywhere in Seattle. Their alpha had always been dedicated to keeping wolves out of society, so as not to spook non-shifters. Their private cab company was one way he accomplished that successfully. Even though Carter felt better knowing that she'd gotten home safely with help from the pack, he couldn't get over one thing. "Why'd you leave the way you did?" Carter asked. "You really freaked everyone out." She swallowed hard and glared at him with a look of utter defiance. "The girl who went with you to the party isn't me. I can't be that person." "What are you talking about?" "I went with you." "No, you went with a glamorized version of me." She tugged at her sweater and swiped her hand down her jeans. This is me. Sweater, jeans, fuzzy slipper. Socks. The girl in the fancy dress with the heels and makeup is fake. I can't be like that floozy Paisley Brooks. Was she jealous? You left because of Paisley? No. She groaned, and threw another potholder at him. I left because of who I am and who I will not be for a man. I don't care how much you're offering. Whoever you were tonight, the council loved it. They loved you. She scoffed. What makes you think that? Oh right. You mean from the way they started chasing after me when I shifted. She rolled her eyes. Yeah, that might have been a clue. That was precautionary, to make sure you weren't going to do anything stupid. They like you, but trusting you will take longer. Carter took off his tux coat, draped it over one of the dining room chairs, and loosened his tie. Mrs. Owens personally invited us to a couples retreat in Victoria on Vancouver Island next weekend. Nate and Paisley were invited too, but they can't do it on account of their wedding. It'll be a perfect time to get their attention trained on us. On me. Oh, that's nice of her, she said, resting her hands on the counter behind her. But count me out. I can't be the person I was tonight. I was awkward. And didn't you hear me? You were a hit. It wasn't because of your dress or your heels. It was because they genuinely liked you. I told you to be yourself, and that was the only way this was going to work. His feet moved forward as if on their own accord. This close to her, he could pick up the subtle mixture of sugar and rain on her skin. You can't back out on me now. We're in. We're in. She spoke the words as if she was in some kind of a daze. That's swell, Carter. Should I wear Gucci or Prada next weekend? Should I bring flats in case I trip over something again? Or a backup dress in case I tear the first like I did tonight? He looked down at her, seeing a different woman than was on his arm tonight. She was confident earlier, and that self-assurance was sexy. Now she was back in her sweats, with her hair pulled in front of her shoulders, looking physically comfortable and yet completely uncertain. She transformed back to the Faith he knew before, the woman he enjoyed spending time with. Her big brown eyes bore into him, and something in his stomach twisted. Wait a second, that tight, knotting feeling hadn't been there yesterday. I don't care if you wear these sweats when you meet them again, he said. Or if you show up with no makeup and a torn and tattered dress. What matters is that you and I are in this together. Together. She blinked up at him, and when she spoke, her voice was faint. Remember when I said I don't like being made to look like a fool? Nate said. You and Paisley are still close. Is that true? So this is about Paisley? He was so confused. Why would Faith waste 2 seconds thinking about Paisley? A woman who meant nothing to him? Is it true? She asked again. Paisley's got serious Hollywood syndrome and has to have all eyes on her all the time. I finally realized I couldn't trust her. I bolted. I guess she's pissed to be the person dumped instead of the one doing the dumping. Faith's breathing rhythm changed, slowed. The tension in her shoulders seemed to ease. He didn't make it sound that way. When did you talk to Nate alone? On the pier when I was waiting for you. He saw me leave to get you a drink. I'm assuming so. Conniving bastard. What did you tell him? That we're very happy in a secure and loving relationship. She nudged him away with her forearm. I painted the picture you asked me to. Something about that whole scenario rubbed Carter wrong. Had Nate been trying to figure out if their relationship was a hoax, or had he been using the opportunity alone to flirt with Carter's fiancée? Friend, he corrected. So are you in? He asked. Will you come to the retreat next weekend? She sighed and glared at him with narrowed eyes. I'm packing my sweats. That's fine. All I ever wanted was for you to be you. I never intended for you to pretend you were somebody else. Nobody could keep that up. He flicked a bag of sugar sitting on the counter. Just promise to leave your baking supplies behind on the trip. Wouldn't want you burning down our hotel room. Wait. She swiped her hand across her forehead, leaving behind a smudge of flour. Our room as in one? We are engaged, Faith. He picked up the bag of flour and pretended to roll. It closed as he turned his back on her. Don't you think it'd look strange if we told Mrs. Owens that we'd like her to reserve us 2 separate rooms? Yes, but we've fallen asleep together on the couch a few times. We should just think of next weekend as an extended Friday night. Fine, she said from behind him. But I call the bed. We'll see about that. He reached into the bag and sank his fingers into the flour. He grabbed a handful and spun around. Surrender the bed and I won't give you a flower shower. If you think I'm afraid, you're sorely mistaken. I bet you throw like a girl. Digging her hand into the sugar bag, Faith pulled out a handful of her own grainy ammo. She faced him, holding the sugar behind her back. I'm not giving you the bed. You can have the couch or the floor, or sleep in the bathtub for all I care. The bathtub. Carter chuckled low and deep. The porcelain would be fucking cold. The bed is mine. Fine. She cocked back. But you're going to have to fight me for it. Faith flinched. Carter didn't bite. She cocked back farther. Humperdinck skidded around the corner and slid over the kitchen tile. He hopped between them excitedly, his sickeningly cute gaze bouncing back and forth between them. Using the pup as a distraction, Faith let the sugar fly. Carter ducked below the sugar cloud and ran at her, tangling her arms behind her back. He pinned her against the oven, using his body for pressure. Laughing hysterically, Faith squirmed, elbowing him in the gut. Let go, she said, the laughter lingering in her voice. Surrender the bed. He held her hands in front of her, shackled by one of his own. With his free hand, he dusted her cheek with flour, covering it with a shadow of white. It's easy to say, Carter, the bed is yours. Try it. She nudged her chin at him, smiling. You think a little flour on my cheek is going to make me buckle? You should have stuck with the flower shower. It even rhymes. All right, you asked for it, you stubborn woman. He held his hand over her and sprinkled flour over her head. All you've got to do is say the words. Just give me the bed and this will all be over. Never surrender. As she shook her head, giggling into a fit, a clump of flour fell from her hair onto her eyelashes. Wait, close your eyes, he said, and reached up to brush off the flour. She hesitated, her now white eyelashes resting feather softly on her cheek. Almost done. He gently swiped away the last of it and then paused, his gaze trailing to her smiling lips. You almost got a ton of it in your eyes. Her smile fell as her eyes fluttered open and she caught his gaze on her lips. That would have stung, he said. He was still holding on to her wrist. Why couldn't he let go? Why didn't he want to? The bed is yours, she said, and twisted out of his. Chapter 10. Just before 4 o'clock, when the mist rolled in to take over the city, Carter exited Starbucks, a steaming cup of house blend in hand. He slid into his Tahoe, then double-checked his cell before starting up the engine. Still no calls from Faith. He hadn't talked to her in days. It seemed strange, even though they'd gone through the week without talking before. He couldn't stop thinking about her. Why couldn't he stop thinking about her? She consumed his thoughts. The way she'd looked in that green dress on Sunday night, the way it accented a figure he didn't realize she had, the way she'd looked in wolf form, lethal yet graceful. The sound of her laughter, light and bubbly, still filled his ears. The radio on his dash chirped, reminding him that he was on duty tonight. Suspicious subject harassing citizens in Seward Park. Caller report seeing a wolfman. Dispatch for the wolf pack rattled. Enforcer Griffin and Enforcer Ramsey on call. Reroute to that location and capture subject before Seattle PD arrives. Shit. There was a werewolf loose in the park. Carter had to find him and bring him in before any other non-shifters spotted him, and then he had to convince the witness that what he or she saw was a giant dog. 10-4. Carter floored his Tahoe as he merged onto I-5 toward Bailey Peninsula en route. Seward Park was a 300-acre forest in the center of Seattle. Hiking trails, fish hatcheries, and lakefront beach access attracted loads of visitors each year. It wasn't uncommon after the full moon for a werewolf to go berserk and try to find solace in the forest. Carter turned off the freeway and entered the park just before nightfall. There were a few cars in the first parking lot, but no one walking around. Rolling down his windows and turning off the radio, Carter patrolled around the park slowly, picking up all kinds of scents. None of them sent off the red flag of a werewolf. He passed a few non-shifters in hiking gear who nodded and continued walking by. If they'd seen a werewolf, they would have been running out of the park, not taking a leisurely sunset stroll. As he reached the end of the peninsula, a howl split the night. Swerving off the road, Carter put the Tahoe in park and hopped out. Softwoods. and Douglas firs towered over him, creating hundreds of hiding spots for a werewolf lunatic to hide. He charged through the brush, but there was nothing to follow. No other sounds, no smells out of the ordinary for a forest filled with woodland creatures. "Come on, howl again," he breathed, checking the taser on his waistband. He was armed, but if he couldn't find the wolf, he wouldn't get the chance to use the weapon. A black Tahoe matching his own pulled behind him. Nate hopped out. "Seattle PD will be here in 10. He spat, charging around the hood. "We've got no time." "One option," Carter said, scanning through the trees. "I'm shifting." "Don't." Nate stormed through the brush, searching the canopies above their heads. "If someone sees you or Seattle PD arrives, they'll think you're the threat and I'll have to ditch out. Not to mention the captain will have your ass in a sling." "I know, but if this guy's crazy, we can't exactly leave him in the hands of the police. Our hands are tied." "Yours might be, but mine aren't," Carter said, feeling tendrils of white-hot energy pulsing through his veins. "Shifting is the fastest way to search him out. If he's a member of our pack, I'll be able to hear his thoughts. I'll find him that way." Nate grumbled something about being a loose cannon but didn't continue arguing. Carter high-stepped over a log as the urge to shift sparked through him. He let the energy swirling inside him ball into a pit in his stomach. He closed his eyes, muscles hardening into anticipatory knots, and let the sensation surge freely through him. He shifted, fell to his hands and knees, as his entire body shuddered. Coarse fur covered his skin in a blanket of black. His muscles bulked up, stretched to fill his massive wolf form. Tendons pulled and snapped into shape. As a wolf, he was robust and muscular, the top of his back nearly reaching Nate's shoulders. "Go get him," Nate said, smacking Carter in the backside. "I'll keep lookout." Carter snapped at Nate's hand and Nate snatched it back. Carter took off into the forest, his strides eating up the ground. He could sense things easier in this form. Every color was more vibrant, every sound more crisp. The energy of the moon flowed through him, empowering his every stride. He hadn't run more than a few minutes before he sensed another wolf in the vicinity. "Leave me alone, enforcer," a scratchy voice said through the pack's process of mind speak. "I mean you no harm." Carter spun around a fir and headed west, toward the main road. Branches brushed his side and threatened to tangle in his fur. With a single row of trees separating him from the road, Carter stopped. He was close. "You may not intend to harm anyone," Carter projected to the wolf, "but you've made yourself known to a non-shifter, breaking one of our cardinal laws. Why don't you come back to the office with me before you get yourself in more trouble?" Seattle PD's sirens blared in the distance. "And make it quick," he added. The wolf emerged from behind a tree. Scruffy brown fur covered a wolf that was no larger than a bullmastiff. Carter could easily talk to the witness and convince him or her that the creature in the park was a dog. They might make it out of this cleaner than he'd originally thought possible. A car passed behind the wolf, drawing his attention around. Carter stole the opportunity, leaping into the air, smacking into the wolf full force. Growling from deep within his belly, Carter pinned the wolf to the ground. But the wolf was squirrely, slipping one of his legs free. Carter ground his back legs into the wolf's belly, but it didn't seem to faze him. He slunk forward, upward, slowly releasing himself from Carter's hold. "No way you're getting away from me," Carter forced out. A pair of park visitors strode across the street, headed right for them. Sirens blared, closing in. In the distance, tires peeled against asphalt. Carter adjusted his grip on the wolf, but the split-second shift in position gave the wolf what he needed to scramble free. He bolted toward the street, his paws striking hard and fast, and headed for the road. "No," Carter hollered through his mind. "Stop." The wolf charged forward. A few more steps and he'd out himself to a couple of unsuspecting humans. Carter did the only thing he could. He dived, stretched out like he was laying out for a popfly, and clawed at the wolf's tail. He caught fur and dug in deep. With a strangled cry, the wolf pounced through the last line of trees and ripped his tail free. Carter landed behind him with a heavy thump, his momentum slinging him in plain sight. The couple shrieked, cowering. Glancing back to check if Carter had followed him, the wolf didn't see as Nate's Tahoe pulled up to the curb. The wolf ran squarely into the side of the SUV, then dropped to the ground like a stone. Nate hauled ass out of the driver's side door and tossed the twitching mountain of fur. Time stood still. Staring open-mouthed, the couple sized Carter up, from his furry muzzle to his larger-than-life back haunches. They were committing the sight to memory, no doubt. Nate stood, his shocked gaze flipping between Carter and the couple. "Get in the back," Nate mumbled, dragging the tossed wolf toward the back of the SUV. As he popped the rear hatch, Carter hopped in and then watched Nate heave the wolf in after him. After rolling into the back seat, Carter shifted back to human form and then, dressed in an extra pair of clothes Nate had stashed into a gym bag in back, Nate handled the couple in the way the Bureau had taught them. He smiled and talked with his hands. They nodded, stared, nodded some more, looking thoroughly confused. At least the SUV's windows were completely tinted. Nate took a notepad out of his back pocket and jotted down things as they spoke. He handed them his business card and turned back to the Tahoe, looking like one hell of a pissed-off enforcer. Seattle PD's lights could barely be seen blinking through the forest across the way. They'd arrived on the wrong side of the park. Hopefully everyone would be long gone by the time they made it around. The lunatic, still in wolf form, twitched on the floorboard, the volts from the taser still singing through him. Realizing the wolf was in the back seat, uncuffed, Carter popped open Nate's arresting kit that lay beside him and snapped the cuffs on him. A few seconds later, Nate slid into the Tahoe and glanced back. "You've lost. You've seriously lost it. Do you know what the captain's going to say when he hears that you outed yourself to some hikers in the park?" They took off onto the freeway and didn't look back. "We got him, didn't we?" Carter said. "What did you tell the couple back there?" "Protocol bullshit." "No, I told them you two escaped from the Woodland Park Zoo. I'm taking you back to your cage as we speak." He laughed. "I don't think they bought it at first, but I'm one hell of an actor. He'd have to remember that." "Does that zoo even have wolves?" Carter asked. "Hell if I know." 30 minutes later, Nate took the exit for Carter's home, gunning the Tahoe around a sharp turn. Thankfully, the nutty werewolf had remained zonked out. After being tossed, specialized tasers built for the wolf pack to take out rogue wolves meant the extreme volts were enough to bring down a wolf and keep him knocked out for hours. "I'm going to call them up later tonight and do damage control," Nate said. "Get some information on the zoo. I'll also look up the first witness and tell them the same story so it matches up." There had to be something more to do. It'd probably be a good idea to arrange a wolf transfer to the zoo this year, just to cover our tracks. Nate craned his neck around. "You are good. Call City Tow for my Tahoe, would you?" Carter said as they pulled in front of his cabin. "PD will probably have towed it by now. I need it back by tomorrow morning." Nate nodded. "I'll put someone at the office on it." "Thanks for having my back, Ramsey." "No problem." Something flickered across Nate's expression before he smiled. "What was I supposed to do? Leave you hanging?" Without giving Carter a chance to respond, he peeled out of the driveway, kicking up gravel as he went. Faith curled into the corner of her couch and started up her computer. She'd just gotten off the phone with Carter, and he said he wanted to come by to grab a beer. Neighbors were supposed to borrow a cup of milk or sugar, but she really wanted to see him, so she didn't mind. She would have driven to the store to buy every beer in stock if it meant Carter would stop by. He said he'd had a bad day at work, the worst he'd said, but wouldn't go into detail. Over the phone, she couldn't help but feel like his stopping by was a sign that their relationship was moving in the right direction. He'd stopped by unannounced before, and they'd even talked over beers on the front porch a few times. But never, not once, had he wanted to come by because he'd had a bad day. Because he wanted to talk it over with her. She wanted to be the person he came to when things got rough, when he needed to confide in someone or open up about his past. She wanted to be that woman. For him so badly it hurt. Maybe today would be the start. As her dog blog queued up, she searched through the traffic stats. 50 comments? She scanned over a few questions from her last post. Wow. More than yesterday. She read. "I have a Chihuahua with little dog syndrome. He won't quit picking on our Dalmatian. I can't keep them apart all the time. What should I do?" Have a little faith. Answer. Watch the behavior carefully. What we might be quick to consider bullying behavior might simply be two dogs playing with each other. What is the Dalmatian's response to the little guy? Do they nip and growl, or are they attacking each other and biting with force? Those Answers will go a long way in determining if your dog's behavior is something that needs to be addressed or looked over. How do you get your dog to stop chewing dryer sheets? Have a little faith's answer. Keep the dryer sheets off the floor, get a trash can with a lid, and buy your dog some fresh-smelling chew toys. Faith kicked her feet up on the couch and checked her email. She'd just heard back from her website designer. The layout he'd made featuring dogs and footprints with easy access to all of her posts and tags was beautiful. Better than she'd anticipated. Traffic on the blog had escalated in the last few months, but this new look was going to catapult it out of the doggy blogosphere. This point she was making about $30 a month off the widgets on the sidebar where she featured top-selling dog toys and treats. She bought her favorite items in bulk off eBay, repacked them and sold them via Amazon. All of the items were Have a Little Faith endorsed. Pretty brilliant if she did say so herself. The front door swung open and Carter walked inside, making a beeline for the refrigerator. Even as a blur of movement he was assertive, his strides sure and even. "Honey, I'm home," he joked, popping the top on a beer. "What's cooking?" Her heart fluttered, although she knew he was joking. How different would her life be with Carter in it? She could try to have a hot meal for him when he walked in the door from work. He could talk to her about his bad day, and then they'd make love in front of the wood stove and all would be right in the world. "Did you not see the dead cake pan on the front porch?" she said, jarring back to reality. They weren't a real couple, and they weren't any closer to making love than she was to being a gourmet chef. It's still there for other cooking pots and pans to witness. Wouldn't want them getting any crazy ideas. "I had Chinese. There are leftovers on the top shelf in back." "Swell." He came out of the kitchen with a beer and white to-go box with a top peeled back, chopsticks sticking out. His dark wash jeans were slung low on his waist, and his black t-shirt bunched over his shoulders, hanging loosely at his sides. "What are you doing?" Fighting the urge to check him out for the 100th time, Faith scrolled to the top of her new site. Her cheeks flushed hot as she remembered how he'd almost kissed her during their food fight. But she'd panicked, as she always did. Besides, she could have read something into that interaction that hadn't actually been there. What if that hadn't been an almost kiss? Have a Little Faith just got a remodel. She spun the computer around to show him. "What do you think?" Gawking, Carter sank into the couch cushions beside her. "That's your blog? Mean that's you. Pretty sweet, right? I've been working really hard on it." "Looks like it." He stared at the site as he chomped down lo mein, then cast his gaze at her, his eyes a mesmerizing shade of sky blue. "What kind of stuff do you talk about?" "Everything dog-related, from toys, treats, exercises, and training techniques to humane animal shelters located by area and map." She snapped the laptop shut and placed it on the coffee table. "I'm building an audience fairly quickly. I've already got 800 followers. Takes me at least an hour every night to answer questions posed at the end of my posts." Humperdinck flew around the corner from the direction of the bedrooms in a flash of black and white. He headed for Carter's ankle, but when Carter snapped his fingers, the pooch stopped and turned toward the kitchen. "What's the point of the blog?" Carter asked, but when she glared at him, he retracted. "I mean, what's your goal? Is this for fun, or are you looking to make money at it?" "Both, maybe." She paused, thinking over the possibilities. Why not both? Why couldn't they have both? The friendship with the relationship? Love with sex? Why did everything have to be either or? Black or white? One or the other? "I wouldn't know." He downed the noodles, then leaned back into the cushions, swiping the back of his hand over his forehead. "Aren't you going to ask your future husband how shitty work went today?" "Oh, I'm sorry, honey," she crooned, swiveling toward him. "How was work, my hard-working, dedicated, enforcing fiancé?" His smile fell. "2 people saw me today. Make that 3. She grinned. "I see you too." "Hardy har. I meant 2 non-shifters saw me in all my furry glory." "That's not good." She ran her fingers through her hair, scrubbing her scalp as she went. This wasn't going to fly at all, especially because he was an enforcer. They were held to a stricter standard than the rest. "Have you met with your captain yet?" He shook his head, looking paler than he had minutes ago. "Nate was there and cleaned up everything as best he could. I'm sure he told the captain the second he dropped me off at home." I wouldn't be surprised if I were called in. First thing tomorrow. She tucked her feet beneath her. Maybe you're not giving Nate enough credit. He knows the kind of pressure you guys are under to close cases and bring rogue wolves in. I'm sure if you shifted in front of humans it was because you didn't have another option. He shrugged. It was a reckless move. I should have played it safe. Do you really think Nate would rat you out? Faith, he's up for the detective position too. This is the perfect opportunity to throw me under the bus and take the job for himself. Is that what you would do to him? Yes. No. He cracked his knuckles. Hell, I don't know. If the captain did find out, it'd probably put you two on a level playing field. Carter squinted at her. How do you figure? Since Nate's not going to make it to the trip this weekend, you're going to have the chance to get closer to the hiring members in the bureau. Nate will be missing out on dinners and meetings. You don't think he'd be there if he could? You're right. Put that in writing, would you? She beamed, her heart doing a little dance. You may have outed yourself, but you'll have opportunities to network this weekend that Nate doesn't have. The way I see it, you'd be even Steven. He seemed to chew over her words, and when he looked at her again, his eyes shone with something she'd never seen before. It almost seemed like adoration. Certainly a far cry from the look he'd given her all the other nights when he'd crashed on her couch or stolen a few beers from the fridge. You're one smart cookie, he said with a wink and a smile. And then he walked out the door, taking her heart with him. Chapter 11. After a 2.5-hour drive from Seattle to Port Angeles, Carter and Faith boarded the ferry to take them to Victoria on Vancouver Island, British Columbia. It rained most of the trip, but when the weather finally lightened up, they strode out to the bow of the Princess Clipper. So what happened with your captain? Faith asked Carter as they stared out over the Olympic Peninsula, the sound of the waves gently slapping against the side of the ferry. Did you get written up or a slap on the wrist or whatever? After I left your place Wednesday, I went straight to the captain. I beat Nate to the punch, Carter said. The captain respected the fact that I came to him first. Nate showed up an hour later, ready to spill everything. You should have seen the look on his face when he found out I copped to it. He looked like a 2-year-old who got his lollipop stolen. A frigid gust of wind blasted into them as the ship cut through the water. Faith huddled into her peacoat and shoved her hands into the pockets. That was quick thinking, she said. Thanks to you. You're the one who sparked the idea. He turned to her, and she lost her breath. He held her gaze for a moment too long, and those darn butterflies fluttered through her stomach again. She shifted her attention to the dark blue waters of the strait. What's the plan for tonight? She asked, veering into comfortable territory. It was Friday, their good old date, yet not night. Do you think the hotel has pay-per-view? Pay-per-view? His eyebrows pitched. You feeling kinky? Simply thinking about getting kinky with Carter made her thighs quiver and made her want to jump him. She smacked him instead. No, I'm talking about new releases. You know, ones that haven't come out in the theater yet. I'm not sure what's going on with the council tonight, he said. I think we're on our own. Goosebumps covered her arms, and they weren't rearing their pokey heads. Because of the cold. On our own. Nothing sounded sweeter. I got a text from Simon, an enforcer who used to be my sergeant before he transferred to Auburn, a city outside of Seattle. He was Nate's sergeant for a while too, from what I understand. His tone was all business and no fun. He wants to talk to me about something as soon as we check in. The ship entered Inner Harbor, slowing to a gentle stop. Where are we staying? Faith asked, watching a few workers throw the moor lines onto the dock. There. He pointed off the port side, to a castle towering majestically above the harbor. The Mistress Monarch. Faith gawked at the intricate brickwork, the moss crawling up the towers and the sparkling harbor steps outside the regal front doors. It's breathtaking. Only the best for the council, apparently. Carter nudged her arm with his shoulder. Come on, let's go. Once they were checked in and Faith had said, oh my God, look at that, more times than she had in her entire life, the bellhop took their bags to their room, leaving them standing in the lobby. Marble columns seemed to sprout out of the glossy tile floor. Gold-framed paintings came to life on the walls. Workers grinned, offering service. The hotel was more like a palace than a hotel and certainly the fanciest place Faith had ever been. Carter! Someone called from behind them. Simon Richards, he said, shaking the balding man's hand. Great to see you. Again. Wish I could say the same. The man's cold gaze raked over Faith from her Converse to her jeans, peacoat, and ponytail. I hear you're getting married. Soon. Carter seemed to stiffen. I am, sir. This is Faith, my fiancée. She's not really your fiancée, he interjected. Faith feigned shock, but didn't peek at Carter for fear she'd give them away. I don't know what you're talking about, Carter said after a tension-filled pause. Carter's fingers interlaced with hers, a warm, loving gesture, but his skin was as cold as ice. Nate Ramsey seems to think otherwise, Simon said. He told me that you and Faith haven't been serious until recently, and the only reason you're telling the captain you're getting married is because you think it'll give you a leg up against him. That's ridiculous. Carter squeezed her hand. We're madly in love. Madly, she agreed. She rose up on tiptoe and kissed him on the cheek. His skin was cool, with a shadow of stubble that grazed against her lips. I don't know why anyone would question this. Simon eyed them curiously. You don't have to worry about convincing me. As the captain and the rest of the bureau, Nate has already alerted them to his suspicions as well. Damn it. Carter shifted his stance. Why would he do something like that? Beating you to the punch, dear, Faith said. Carter nodded, clearly catching her drift. Since Nate didn't get to squeal to the captain about Carter shifting in the park, he thought he'd try another route to climb to the top. But how did he know their engagement was phony? Thanks for the heads up. Carter took Simon's hand and shook. Will I be seeing you soon? That depends. Will you be going on the adventure tour tomorrow morning? Adventure tour? Every retreat, we start with some kind of adventure to get our blood pumping. This year the captain is keeping it a surprise, but we're meeting out front at dawn. The itinerary should be in your room. He smacked Carter on the shoulder. You both should come. They're always a riot. We will, Faith interrupted, forcing a wide grin. See you at dawn. They didn't travel to Victoria to sit in the hotel, although from the looks of the place she wouldn't mind living and dying here. They were going to capitalize on every moment they could. Talk to as many members of the council, as many sergeants and lieutenants and high-ranking officials they could find. If they were going on an adventure tour, she and Carter would too. Simple as that. Great, Simon said, trudging toward the elevators. Watch your back, Carter. There are people taking aim when you're not watching. Thanks, sir. And Carter, if you're serious about this lucky lady being your bride, I suggest you do something soon to prove it. Carter nodded. Will do. Simon left, leaving them standing alone in the lobby. Something to prove it, Carter mumbled, raking his hands through his hair. You've got a damn ring and we're here as a couple. What more does he want? It's not like we can get married here and now. Stress lines burrowed into his forehead as he frowned. Faith hated seeing him this way. If only there were something she could do to make his stress disappear. Excuse me, a tiny voice said from behind them. They spun around. A woman no taller than 5 foot even peeked over the counter. She was dressed in a white and green suit, her golden hair pulled back into a bun. She looked like hotel service Tinker Bell. You can get married here. She smiled, her petite shoulders rising to her ears. We have an elopement package at the Monarch. For $2,000. You get an upgraded bridal suite with champagne and chocolate in the room. And breakfast in bed the following morning. Sounded hasty and a bit ridiculous. But doing those things with Carter? And over the wedding contract with the hotel, and it was as good as signed. $2,000? Carter looked paler than he had before. Highway robbery. Faith chuckled. Yeah, but it's robbery with chocolate. She couldn't imagine dropping $2,000 on a last-minute wedding, but that was probably because she'd been saving every penny earned from her dog blog to give to Dawson. Her blog hadn't yet earned $2,000, but soon. Hopefully. If you want to book the package for tonight, Tinkerbell continued, I can arrange it. We have a balcony on the 4th floor open with a stunning view of Inner Harbor. Tonight? Tension whirled through the space between them. As Tinkerbell spouted more details, the situation became insanely clear. They could actually do this. Would she want to? Would he want to? This wasn't a fairy tale anymore. This was reality. Carter went palms down on the reservations desk and lowered his head. I can't believe we're going to do this. She couldn't either. She was seriously about to marry the man of her dreams. Her stomach tumbled at the thought. A squeaky, whiny voice warned not to get too excited, but she shut that voice up before it said something incredibly rude. There was only one solution to Carter's problem, though it was far from simple. It was exactly what she wanted. Is it too late to have invitations printed up and delivered to a few guests staying in the hotel? Faith asked. No, ma'am. Head bowed, Carter breathed hard, in and out, in and out. Carter, sweetie. Faith knelt and looked up at him. His head was low, hanging between his outstretched arms. The blood was rushing to his face, making his cheeks fire engine red. How bad do you want the job? His light eyes burned with tenacity. I've never wanted anything more. What would that kind of determination feel like if it was directed at her? Just once she'd like to experience that kind of passion, to know what it felt like to be desired and chased and wanted with that kind of fierceness. Then let's do this, Faith said. What better way to prove to the captain that Nate was full of shit than to get married here and now with a few members of the bureau watching? His breathing slowed and he raised his head. You're right, he said slowly. You're always right. You better stop saying that. She slipped his wallet from his back pocket, took out his visa, and then dropped it on the counter in front of Tinkerbell. Or it's going to go straight to my head. As Tinkerbell rang Carter's card, that squeaky, whiny voice piped up again. Whispered something about her feelings for Carter spreading from her head to her heart and beyond. This time she couldn't tell the voice to quiet. Deep down she knew it spoke the truth. Her feelings for Carter had rooted deeper than friendship. She wanted him every way a woman could want a man. And she wanted him for always. Chapter 12. By early evening, wedding invitations had gone out to the captain's room. Carter was too busy pacing through the lobby mumbling to himself to ask whether or not he'd responded. He'd parted ways with Faith after he'd put down the chunk of change for the elopement package. All along the plan had been to get married, but now that he was standing here, minutes away from getting hitched again, his feet were cold as ice. His first marriage had been a bust. He'd found his luminary. He'd gotten stronger because of it, and his lifespan had lengthened to 1,000 years. But just because he'd found the person fate wanted him to be with didn't mean that they wouldn't fight because they had. And it didn't mean that his luminary would be physically satisfied with him, because she hadn't been. She'd argued to the end that physical intimacy was different and completely separate from spiritual intimacy. She cheated more times than he cared to remember. This time he wouldn't get emotionally attached. He wouldn't feel anything. He'd close off, be married for a few short months, and make a clean break. Carter, Faith said from behind him. He turned. Don't laugh. She stood in the center of the lobby, her hands on her hips. It was all I could find. She wore thick white tights, white snow boots with a rim of brown fur, and a puffy white parka. Her dark hair was drawn over her shoulders as she always wore it, and a light sheen of pink lip gloss coated her lips. She was a snow bunny, ready to kick back in a ski lodge and huddle by the fire with a warm drink. She wasn't what he was expecting, not by a long shot, but Faith never was. She always managed to surprise him, to take him off guard. Where was the flowing white dress? The veil that hid her teary eyes? The bouquet of flowers? It was going to be easy pretending that this wedding was a sham. No emotional attachment. He coughed out a laugh. At least it's white. I look like the abominable snowman. She charged up and smacked him in the shoulder as if he was the one who'd said it. I searched every store within a 5-block radius. Do you know how hard it is to find a white dress in the middle of winter? Let me tell you, it's impossible. This was all I could find. Someone needs to design a blog the way I did, but for weddings. You know, with links to great dresses and flowers and things for local shoppers. All in one place. Really was a great idea. The girl had brains and beauty. You should do it then. Dog trainer and wedding planner extraordinaire. You could merge the blogs into one and call it Matrimonial Mutts. He grinned when she smacked him again, then flinched against her attack. For her effort. I think you look great. Snowy but great. Shut it. But she smiled and her entire face lit up. Where'd you find the suit? I brought it. He smoothed down his black slacks and double-checked that the white handkerchief was still poking out of the front breast pocket. I was under the impression there were going to be some bureau meetings. Good call. Where is everyone? She glanced around the lobby. Have you heard from the captain? No, but I think it's about time we head up. He checked the time. It was nearly 6 o'clock, which meant they had a few minutes to get to the room reserved for their wedding. Ready? She sighed. Consider me your snow woman, ready for escort. They didn't talk on the elevator ride up. The air seemed clouded with tension, which was so unlike them. When the doors peeled open, Faith gasped and grabbed his arm, sending jolts of electricity shooting to his shoulder and down into his chest. The captain and 5 high-ranking officials craned around to stare at them as they stepped out. Thank you for coming on such short notice, Carter said, touching Faith's hand which still gripped his arm. Her skin was warm and much softer than he thought it'd be. We're happy you could be here. Are you kidding? Captain Rich said, extending his arms wide. One of our enforcers is getting married today. We wouldn't miss it. Smiling tightly, the other officials turned and made their way onto the wide, sweeping balcony outside a set of glass double doors. Although the rain had let up, the wind didn't get the same memo. It blew fiercely over the balcony, and as Carter led Faith outside, he staggered back from the force. A balding minister waited at the balcony's ledge, his silky black robe swirling and tangling around his legs. Holy son of a preacher man, this was really happening. Now or never. If he jumped off the ledge, would he live? Carter, Faith said, shaking his arm. The minister asked if you're ready. Oh, yes. He shook his head as an icy gust of wind whipped around the edge of the building, leveling into them. Which ledge had he been thinking about? Again? Of course I am, we are. The captain and the other officials stood back against the windows, waiting, watching with suspicious looks marring their faces. Simon had been right. Nate must have told the members of the bureau about his doubts. As Faith took her place on one side of the pastor, Carter faced her. She was cute in her snow gear, puffy and warm. She was closer to a fluffy rabbit than the abominable snowman. She tried to cover her scar, but with the wind thrashing around them like this, her hair wouldn't stay put. The fading purple line started at her left ear and traveled down her neck, disappearing into the obnoxious fur lining her collar. But obnoxious had suddenly morphed into adorable. He bit back a laugh as the minister droned on about what marriage means and how to keep love alive. At the mention of the L word, his hands got clammy. He swiped them on his pants and focused on Faith, on her chestnut hair swirling around her face, on her button nose and heart-shaped lips. She was giving all of this up for him, he realized as the minister babbled on. She'd wanted a real marriage filled with love and laughter. She'd wanted a forever bond. Guilt nailed him in the gut. He'd already found his mate. He couldn't give that to her. Do you, Carter Griffin, the minister went on, take Faith O'Roy Hamilton to be your wife? O'Roy, Carter whispered, suppressing a laugh. Griffin, she fired back, voice low. Touché. He couldn't take his eyes off her mouth and that beaming smile. And I do. The minister turned to Faith. Do you, Faith O'Roy Hamilton, take Carter Griffin to be your husband? His breath caught as doubt filled the space in his chest. She cocked a brow. I do. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Let no man separate what God has brought together. The minister spread his arms between them as the captain and officials clapped wildly behind them. You may now kiss your bride. Carter's stomach dropped to his knees. He'd completely forgotten about the kiss. This was not going to go well. Sure, Faith's lips looked soft and plush, but there'd be nothing behind it. Nothing to make his cock rock-a-doodle-doo. Would the council be able to tell that there was no spark? Would they see through this? Faith took a step closer, eliminating the space between them. Her body radiated warmth, even through the ginormous layers of down. Snaking an arm around her waist, Carter slowly drew her against him. He caught her gaze and held it as he lowered his mouth over hers. She sucked in a sharp breath of air. He caught her mouth as her lips parted. Fireworks. Her mouth was supple and yielding, luxuriously sweet. She moved against him as if she'd kissed him 1,000 times before and knew exactly what he liked. He should have pulled back, but against his better judgment, his hold tightened. As he squeezed the arm behind her back and bent her into him, she gave a little whimper from the back of her throat that made his stomach wrench. He nearly growled as he stamped another, hotter, kiss on her lips. He nudged her lips apart. The world crashed down around him. With the force of a gust of wind, Carter remembered where he was, who was watching what had just happened, and whom he was kissing. He pulled back so quickly his knees nearly buckled. Faith looked shocked. Scared and pale, her lips a kiss-smudged shade of pink. He touched 2 fingers to his lips. They were still buzzing, burning from the memory of her mouth. That kiss, it changed everything. He'd liked it. Really fucking liked it. So much so that if there weren't multiple sets of eyes trained on them, he just might have slammed Sweet Faith Hamilton against the wall and kissed her until he blew her snow boots off. Chapter 13. They'd kissed. More than that, they'd kissed as husband and wife. And it was better than Faith could have imagined. She could still taste Carter. His mouth had been warm and gentle as his lips brushed hers. But the kiss burned deep, tingling her legs with white-hot currents of electricity. Had he felt it too? All the way to their room, Faith had wondered what the elopement package honeymoon suite would look like. Turned out they got a bed fit for a mammoth, a jacuzzi bathtub, a bottle of British Columbia bubbly, and views of Victoria. An inner harbor that stole Faith's breath away. It'd be awfully romantic if she and Carter were a couple who were actually in love. When this was over, she could find the love of her life and they could come back here for their honeymoon. A real one. Or maybe she and Carter could fall in love and spend their anniversaries here. Yeah, like that was going to happen. Faith shoved a miniature candy bar into her mouth and smushed it around in her cheeks. She'd skipped dinner. Not smart considering that all that was up in the suite was a fully stocked bar and baskets stuffed with chocolates from France. "Oh Roy, huh?" Carter said, flopping into the middle of the king-size bed, covered with red rose petals. They went scattering over the floor. He shooed the rest off the bed with his hand. "There's a story in there somewhere. Doesn't mean I want to share it," she said, and yanked a pair of yoga pants and a WSU sweater out of her bag. She wasn't going skiing anytime soon, so she jetted to the bathroom to change. "Want to talk about Griffin?" "Hell no," he hollered from the other room. A long pause and then, "Do you feel any different as Mrs. Carter Griffin?" "I've got a killer headache." "Do you think that's on account of taking your name?" She couldn't help but laugh, and watched her expression change in the gold-rimmed bathroom mirror. Her dark eyes were lightened with amusement and her skin was glowing. She was married to Carter. She changed quickly and joined Carter in their honeymoon suite. He changed, too, into a pair of flannel pajama pants and a white cotton t-shirt that showed off the intricate designs on his arms. Maybe tonight she'd get to see those tattoos up close. His pants were slung low on his hips as he always wore them, showing off his sexy backside. The shirt clung to his chest, his pectoral muscles bulging through the fabric as he adjusted himself on the bed. He was such a sexy male specimen, she couldn't look at him long before drool formed on her lips and warmth spread between her legs. "There are no new releases that I'd want to see, but they've got the most recent Star Trek movie," Carter said, flipping through the channels. Did he know he could grace the cover of Home magazine? He was effortlessly model material. Even casually punching remote buttons had become erotic. "We can watch it for the small price of our unborn child." Faith drew back the curtains and looked out over Inner Harbor through the rain, battering the glass. If the temperature plummeted tonight, it just might snow. She touched her hands to the glass, hoping they'd cool the heat blooming over her palms. "Do you have any children?" she asked offhandedly. The mention of an unborn child got her thinking about it. "I've never thought to ask." It certainly was a possibility, considering he'd been mated before. "I would have told you by now if I did." He punched buttons on the remote and squinted at the screen. "My ex-wife and I could never get on the same page about that." Faith nodded. "She wanted children and you didn't? Flip it and reverse it." He slid back to the center of the bed, fluffed the pillows behind him, and leaned against the headboard. "I wanted children and she didn't." Her stomach twisted. Really? It wasn't that Carter wasn't the fatherly type. But he wasn't. He was covered in tats, said whatever came out of his mouth without thinking about it, and was insanely work-driven. With a promotion he'd been fighting for, when would he have time for a family? Was work something that he settled for because he couldn't have the wife and children he'd always wanted? He cleared his throat awkwardly. "My marriage wasn't all that it seemed." The words replayed in her head over and over again until her feet moved to the bed of their own accord. What do you mean? She sat on the edge and leaned back into the mound of pillows he'd built. My wife and I weren't happy, he said simply. She frowned. But when we first met, you said you two were fated. You'd found your luminary. Weren't fated mates supposed to be happy? He bought Star Trek on instant video and went silent as the opening credits rolled. It wasn't until Captain Kirk's sexy face pulled into a perplexed frown, for the third time, that she curled her feet beneath her and turned to Carter. He stared at the screen, a vision of closed-off mail. If he was too stiff to open up, she'd rattle him until he did. What were friends for anyway? Want to play a game? She asked innocently. What? A game. Want to play? His eyebrow quirked. Depends on the game. Every time someone calls Scotty by name, we take a shot, and if Spock gives a statistic, we have to share something personal about ourselves. I'm down with the shots. He hauled himself off the bed and popped open the mini-fridge. But I'll pass on the sharing. Come on, she said, getting more comfortable beneath the sheets. We're married now. I'm sure there is a ton we don't know about each other, and it would cover our backs if the members of the Bureau ask us something personal. This weekend. Fine, but I choose the liquor. He threw 2 mini bottles of tequila onto her lap and another 2 onto his side of the bed. Let's roll. Shit, tequila was poison. She'd be on the floor in 2 drinks, 3 tops. Within minutes, she'd tossed back her 2-swig limit. They'd shared everything impersonal that they possibly could. She knew the names of his parents and friends, where he'd gone to school, what he'd wanted to be when he grew up. Didn't surprise her that he'd wanted to be a detective since he was a teenager. They talked about their first transition, Carter's during adolescence, and Faith's the first full moon after she was attacked, and how they handled it. As Spock rattled on about the carbon monoxide to oxygen ratio in an unknown planet's atmosphere, Carter cursed. My turn first. He crossed his feet at the ankles and sighed. I was up for promotion once for the same position I'm vying for now. I applied 25 years ago, around the time my wife died. They thought I might have been too unstable under the circumstances of losing my luminary. Were you? Geez, her lips were getting loose. Now if they would simply press against Carter's lips, the party would jump from mediocre to stellar. He shook his head and frowned. Your turn. I'm not really brunette, she said, twisting a lock of hair around her finger. I'm a redhead. Really? The color gets mistaken for dark brown anyway, so it's not a harsh change. He tilted his head, as if imaging her with a different hair color. You'd look like, never mind. That's for another Spock moment. Smiling from the corner of his mouth, Carter diverted his gaze. She was about to ask him to finish when Captain Kirk screamed for Scotty to beam him up. Faith took a nip from the second bottle and waited, watching the screen for the next statistic. When Spock babbled about significant results again, Carter turned to her. My first tattoo was the white hawk soaring across my chest. And it was drop-dead gorgeous. Unbelievably detailed. She'd only gotten a glimpse of it as he was chopping wood or mowing the lawn shirtless. What she wouldn't give to have a close-up look. No, wait, she said. What were you going to say I looked like? I don't have to share what you want me to. But you said. I said I'd wait for another Spock moment. He turned back to the television. It's not this one. She deflated into the pillows, her shoulders slumping. For a second she thought he might have said she looked beautiful. But women with curves weren't his type, she reminded herself. He liked boring, board-straight figures with very dry personalities and impossibly long legs. You didn't share anything, he said after a beat. Don't think you're pouting. Fit will get you out of it. She smacked him playfully across the chest with the back of her hand, the way she always did. This time he caught her arm. Gasping, she tried to jerk it back. He didn't budge. The longer his skin touched hers, the more a delicious blush bloomed across her skin. She was either very drunk or very turned on. In all likelihood it was both. It's your turn, he prodded, his gaze burning hot. I want you to let go of my arm. That's not nearly revealing enough. I can tell you want me to let go from the way you're twisting your wrist around. From the television, Spock ordered Scotty to put more power into the ship's engines. With her free hand, Faith took a hearty gulp. Her dizzying fifth. Carter did the same, tossing it back with a smooth head bob. Okay, she said on a throaty sigh. My middle name is Elroy after my mother's father. He moved the family from Ireland when my mother was a young girl. She said he changed her life and that I would do the same. He dropped her arm. Seriously? That's fucking sweet. Snorting laughter was brought to the romantic moment by Jose Cuervo. 30 minutes later, another statistic had Faith whooping, her arms flying above her head. Her insides were deliciously warm and her head was fuzzy. You're up, husband. The explanation for Griffin. I know you want it. He crossed his hands behind his head and slid beneath the covers. But the story behind it isn't nearly as good as yours. That doesn't mean you shouldn't tell me. She faced him and got up on her knees, waving her hands in front of his face. Divulge, man, divulge. He shrugged, looking too much in control of his body. He wasn't drunk enough. Not by a long shot. My father had a sense of humor, he said. No story to it. She gawked. That's it? Carter Griffin was supposed to be funny. People name their kids worse things. Hollywood couples have some great examples. He nudged his chin at her. You're up. She let the liquid courage flowing through her system have control over her mouth. Probably a bad idea, but whatever. It wasn't like she hadn't made a poor decision yet today. She'd eaten double the amount of Weight Watchers points that she should have, downed way too many swigs of the devil's drink, and married her friend so her little brother could go to Yale. Chocolate, tequila, and no sex guaranteed for the next few months. She was mother-effing brilliant. When you first moved in, she forced out, feeling tipsier by the second, I had a crush on you. His eyes tracked across the bed more slowly than usual. You did. Yeah, but it didn't last long. Chills gathered at the base of her spine as the lie left her lips. I wouldn't want to do anything that would mess up our friendship. He stared, his hands lying still in his lap. Man, what she wouldn't give to be able to read his mind. You mean something like get married, he said, and kept his eyes trained on hers. We didn't do this because we love each other. I'm helping you out and you're helping me out. Friends help friends, don't they? He nodded slowly, his gaze focusing on the television. They do. Scotty beamed up two members of the ship. They thanked him by name. Faith and Carter took a long gulp in silence, and then before she could wrap her head around what was happening, his hand found the back of her neck and his lips were on hers. His grip was forceful, his hands rough. Their kiss during the wedding ceremony had surprised her. It was sweet and tender with undercurrents of heat that melted the skin over her bones. This time the kiss was intense, pure and simple, fierce and scorching hot. The man knew how to kiss. He was an expert, no doubt, from all the women he dated and ditched. Why am I thinking about them? She pushed the bimbos from her mind as his tongue grazed her lips. She opened her mouth and welcomed him in. He tasted like tequila mixed with something heady and tantalizingly male, a mixture that was as dizzying as it was electrifying. He pulled back, though his hand remained on the nape of her neck. Faith, his voice low and rough, rumbling through her ears. Friends don't kiss like that. Let me show you what else they don't do. She swiped her tongue across his lips, a quick flick that made his pupils widen with hunger. 1 second they were side by side and the next, he'd flipped her onto her back and pinned her beneath him. She was trapped in the cage of his muscular body, though she wouldn't want to escape if she could. He was completely overwhelming. Alpha to the extreme. She'd wanted this, had just been daydreaming about what this would feel like. She had to feel him to see those tattoos that traveled across his chest. Grazing her hand over the ridge of his pants, Faith slipped her fingers beneath his shirt and touched skin. His abs were hot, a sheath of silky skin over bulging steel ridges. She peeled the shirt over his head and raked her nails over his chest muscles, tracing the wings of a white hawk painted across his right side. It was beautiful. As her fingers caressed the hawk's wings, he sucked in a deep breath that sounded like a hiss. He bent down to catch her mouth. His tongue flew past her, lips searching, claiming. The kiss screamed possession. As she whimpered into him, he moaned and crushed his hips against hers. He wanted this, wanted her. As if he read her mind, he said, yes. Quivering, she reached up and kissed him again. This time her tongue went deep, twirling along his. Low in her belly, butterflies twisted and turned and jumbled together. Friends can make the best lovers, you know. She grabbed hold of the bottom of her sweater, rose up and lifted it from her torso. When she fell back against the bed, her breasts barely covered by a white lace bra, Carter groaned, fisting the pillow on either side of her head. You can touch if you want. Oh, the alcohol was really setting in now. Carter, what's the matter? Although it didn't make any sense at all, he stared at her as if she were a stranger to him, as if he was struggling to catalog the features of her face, trying to grasp some form of recognition. His color changed. His cheeks were beet red, the vein on his forehead straining, his shoulders flexing and twitching from bearing his weight over her. What is it? Can't. His hungry gaze lowered to her bra. We have to stop. No, he couldn't stop. Not when they were tangled in silk sheets, the smell of roses on the air, albeit mixed with splashes of tequila, with the view of twinkling lights in the harbor. She was practically quivering with want, on the verge of something really freaking great. She was damp between her legs, and about to beg him to take the ache away. He put one hand on her shoulder to hold her in place. We have to stop. We do. No, we don't. Feeling feisty, she pulled out all the stops. We're married. By God's law, we can do this whenever we want. We can't do this, he ground out between clenched teeth. We shouldn't. She giggled, letting her fingers dance down his abs to the ridge of his jeans. Oh, I think we can and we should. Do you need another drink to help you? Relax. This is a mistake. It doesn't have to be. I don't want this. He closed his eyes, his jaw clenching wildly. I don't want. Ice water shot through her veins. The serial dater didn't want her. That's what he was going to say. He didn't need to finish. She could read the horrible words all over his face. The guy, who had no problems picking up and dumping women like yesterday's newspapers, didn't want to sleep with her. He didn't seem to have a problem before she stripped out of her sweater. He saw something he didn't like. Wonderful. The perfect end to a perfect day. She should have ditched the minibar chocolate and opted for rabbit food instead. I should have known all along. I've seen the other women you dated and I knew I wasn't like them. She dragged her sweater over her chest, covering her breasts, and wiggled out from beneath him. Take the damn bed. You've earned. I'm sleeping in the tub. Faith, don't be. But it was too late. She ripped every cover off the mattress, trapped a pillow against her body, and stormed into the bathroom, locking the door behind her.